We're interviewing Albert J. Harris at the Saratoga Armory. It is July 30th, 2001. Interviewer is Michael Akey. Videographer is Wayne Clark. Al, where were you born?
I was born in Harris, New York, which is a small hamlet down between Monticello and Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there, lived there until I was through high school.
Oh.
I went to high school in Monticello, and then from then on I moved to New York right after that to Brooklyn. And I was in Brooklyn at the time the war started in '41.
Okay.
And during '42, I realized that I could better start looking for some spot. I was very vulnerable, 18 years old and single. So I shopped around and hit on I tried the Marines, and I enlisted, and I was called up on December the 7th, 1942. And they made a big thing of it at the time. There was a whole, down in the lower Broadway, the recruiting thing had a room full of people, and it made the front page of the Daily News and the Post and everything that day. Mm-hmm. But then we went into oblivion.
Why'd you decide on the Marines? You looked around.
I shopped a few places. I knew I didn't want to particularly go into the Navy because I thought I might not enjoy life aboard ship, and you're sort of confined there a good part of the time. And the Army had no appeal, and I don't know, I was 18 years old and I wasn't thinking things out too well. I probably, at the time, probably made a foolish move, but I just went. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you were sworn in on, was it December 7th?
December 7th, '42. We left for to go down to Paris Island that day.
What were the thoughts that went through your head when you heard that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor?
Probably my first thought was I was wondering where the hell was Pearl Harbor, like everybody else. I don't remember any particular emotions really at the time. I didn't know much about I wasn't following the world situation. I didn't know that this had been a crisis for all the periods. I was just existing in New York, and
So now, was your trip to Paris Island the first time really away from home?
Outside of trips to down to the city, to ball games and things like that, yeah. It was my first really away from home.
What was that experience like, Paris Island?
Horrible. It was 12 weeks of hell. It was horrible. You just kept thinking that you weren't going to die. And that seemed like a terrible prospect. But it was, as soon as you step foot on the base, it takes about, you're just, again, independent type kids and all types of people. You're on the base about 2 minutes or less, and you've already become molded in their image. I mean, they come down on you like just unbelievable. It's very hard, and they tell you not to worry about the people at home. They forgot about you already, and it's you better give your soul to the Lord because your ass belongs to the Marine Corps. And, I mean, they did everything in the world to make your 12 months miserable, but it was, it had its moments, but I didn't think too much about it. I was too busy doing what they told me to.
Was it good training for what you had to do?
No. But it was good training and discipline. It was massive training and discipline, and that was the whole name of the game anyway.
Any events stand out in your mind during basic?
Not really, except, just a lot of petty, I guess, just dominating, they just made you aware that you belong to them, that there's, and then they started to build up a pride, I think, probably secretly they built up a pride in the fact that you were in an elite unit and you better live up to the other people and stuff like that. But what they did very well, and they did it fast, and you got to know the basics of being a Marine or a soldier. No, it wasn't anything that's helped me later on.
How was it being a New Yorker? Was there any?
Well, I probably there are a lot of New Yorkers in it, perhaps, because that's where our whole bunch coming down from Broadway were basically, I suppose, New Yorkers. I tell you the truth, I didn't do that much socializing. I didn't have time to find out much about anybody. I didn't make any close friends.
Really?
No.
Now, do you think that was typical?
Yeah. Yeah, they don't.
So once you get done with basic, where's your next
Then they shipped me up to Camp Lejeune, which is in North Carolina, and that's the East Coast Marine training base. And at that time, they were just forming the 4th Marine Division. And I was one of the first people that came into the 4th Marines. And we were there probably, it was just a nucleus of people, probably a month or two, that's all. Then they moved us across the country on a troop train to Camp Pendleton, California. And Camp Pendleton, they formalized the whole outfit. And I became an assistant machine gunner in the 24th Marines of the 4th Division, K Company. Then I really just started to build up relationships with the other people, your platoon anyway. They never had much chance to socialize with the rest of the regiment. I wouldn't have known the rest of the regiment probably if I fell over them. But I did get to know people in the company. Our company was, of course, about 200, 250 people. Through my sight, and the people in my platoon, they're very close, of course.
What was the sergeant like? What was your sergeant like?
He was a post-war Marine. He was solidly of the old school type, but he wasn't a bad guy. I don't think he didn't work out too great in combat, but it wasn't bad. He was just ordinary, but he knew what had to be done in the way of training. But you see, the problem with the training at that time, they didn't have much to go by. They were fighting, by this time it was obvious that the Marines were going to be strictly a Pacific force, and they were fighting an enemy that was nothing like World War I, and that's the only basis they had of how to train people. World War I, which was trench warfare. And so they trained us on, spent a lot of time on stuff that was ridiculous, but they had to keep us busy. I remember they trained, I took a long time, 2 or 3 weeks, semaphore, waving semaphore. Well, you know, the islands out there, if you raised a semaphore flag, you would have been long dead before you got the second flag up there. It was useless stuff. And they trained very little live ammunition training, none. I never threw a grenade. Here I am, first ranger. I never threw a live grenade. I was the assistant gunner on the on the 30 caliber machine gun, but the only thing I did was carry the ammunition to feed it into the gun. I never fired it on the range.
Was it air-cooled or
water-cooled? Which, that's another story too. They trained us on and how to take apart the water-cooled and how to carry it with a big tripod and everything. We never used that in combat. You couldn't use a water-cooled, and those islands carry a water-cooled machine gun, so we used the air-cooled 30 all the while. And I tell you, all the training they did was kind of worthless, because I think I would have learned how to dig a hole by myself, or climb down the net of a ship. I could have figured that out without them telling me. But again, it goes back to their strong point, and that was command and discipline. You got to realize that you obey whatever you're told to do, and there was no. You knew where you stood, and they had to do something to pass the time. But there was a lot of, I see now a lot of times on a History Channel they show the Marine training or something, and it's so much more sophisticated than it was then. But it worked. We were young, probably enlisted people were 18-year-old average, and even the junior officers might have been 24, 25. So.
Now, after Camp Pendleton, where did you?
I got to get a drink of water.
Sure.
We were at Pendleton up until January 13th, 1944.
That long?
Yeah, I joined in 43. It was about a year.
Okay.
And we left Pendleton to San Diego. We tripped out from San Diego. We stopped at Pearl Harbor. At the time, it was still a mess. You know, in fact, we stopped there for a couple of days to pick up the rest of the convoy. And I remember they gave us a day off just to stretch our legs, and they had planking going from our transport across the side of the Oklahoma, and from Oklahoma to Fort Island, where they had a little recreation for us. But I walked there. That was my first visit on any place outside the United States, was walking across the Oklahoma. I think we probably still had bodies in at that time.
What was your impression of Pearl Harbor? Any thoughts going through it?
Well, I was awed by the destruction. It just, of course, what they had released at the time to the general public didn't cover the situation. But anyway, we were only there for a few days, and then the whole convoy, we went out and we landed on the Marshall Islands. We attacked Roy Namur, which was the first pre-war Japanese island. And
what was that?
That was very successful. It was only 2 days, I think, to take this atoll. The Army 7th Division took the Kwajalein itself, which is on the southern end of the atoll, and it was very, very successful. Their losses weren't too. We only lost 200 or 300 killed on that. But
anybody from your regiment?
From my platoon and battalion, yeah, we had. In fact, we had a Congressional Medal of Honor winner.
Oh, really?
On a guy named Sorensen, who fell on a grenade and apparently saved lives using our company.
So what was it? What was it like your first experience in combat?
Well, it was really, I can still, it wasn't bad. They loaded, what they did, they moved the, I thought it was a very big, like a big pearl necklace made of little islands. They moved the convoy in, the attack ships, which we were on LSTs at this time, inside the harbor. They moved us. And then that morning early, they put us into the LSTs and started to circle us around to get the waves together. Then when it was going to be the 8-hour D-Day, they start straightening up the lines. And they make these lines. I was in the first wave going in, and they make these lines get them just in the right order that they want. And then, so you go past the destroyer escorts were maybe a couple thousand feet off the shore. And as we went by them, going towards the shore, I remember looking up and seeing the sailors waving, at us, and I thought, holy Christ, what do I got into here? I said, that was the first thing I realized that, hey, I should be someplace else. This is terrible. So that 2 to looked like 2 to 1. You won't come back, But our particular ship landed in a pretty good spot. We didn't land right in front of the pillboxes, so it wasn't too bad. I jumped off they're quite high, the LSTs or the LCVTs, the track vehicles. And when I was so loaded when I jumped off with gear, everything from gas masks to strips of ammunition to, I was the instrument corporal theoretically. Nobody knew what that was, but I had all that crap. I had range finders and I had maps and binoculars, like Rommel. But when I went off the thing, I went flat on my face in a surf. That was my first first invasion. It was all right. That was another thing. Going back to the old World War I philosophy, everybody in the squad had a job, and they didn't really. That's all they knew, that there were such things as assistant gunner, instrument corporal, runners, all these World War II things, which meant something, I guess, then. So I made they told me I'd be the instrument corporal. Well, that sounded good. I was only a PFC. And I was an instrument corporal. I get a promotion. But no, there was no promotion. And nobody did anything until we were about 2 weeks from sailing, leaving California. And suddenly, all this fancy gear started to come in, labeled for the instrument corporal. And I had this range finder. It looked like a golf bag in a beautiful leather case. And I had no idea even how to open the case, what would you need a range finder on an Atom? I had another instrument which came in a smaller case, leather case, which is something to do with map making. I had a stopwatch. I had a pair of binoculars that are that big in the case again, and I had a map case.
Plus all your regular equipment.
All my regular equipment. So I said to the sergeant, what am I going to do with this? He says, I don't know, but don't you hold on, you lose it into your ass. So I carried and my gas mask too, I carried all this crap ashore, and I threw it away first thing. Nobody ever asked me about it. That was the end of the instrument corporal. They guess they felt that they could win the war without instrument corporals, and everything was fine.
That's a great.
So that lasted 2 days, and then they put us back aboard ship, and we went back to Maui, which was to be our training ground. And that was about 1,000 miles back. And so the whole division was put in a tent camp which they built on the side of the. Have you ever been to Hawaii? Well, they got a big volcano called Haleakala, and they put this massive tent camp there, and that was our training grounds for the next about 4 or 5 months, and then we went off again to attack Saipan and Tinian.
Now, had they learned any lessons in the first invasion?
I think the only thing they had to learn was...
Except that they didn't need an instrument.
Yeah. One important thing they learned, not from that operation, but from the one just before it, which was made by the 2nd Marine Division, that was Tarawa. Tarawa, a lot of their landing boats got hung up on a coral, and people had to wade in, and they were decimated. It was a really... So this time, for our invasion, they had gotten a hold of all these track vehicles, which would go over the coral, so everybody got in. That was a very important thing about it. But, you know, the Japanese, the position the Japanese were in by this time was always defense, and they were dug in. I never saw a live Japanese in my 4 battles. I never saw one live one.
Now, what were you told about Saipan?
On our way to Saipan, they had tell us quite a bit about the contour of the island and what we could expect and where the various. They had a mock-up of the island on ship. And they told us whatever they knew about it, which was limited. And I would say that we had all we needed.
Now, the overall commander for that operation was Holland Smith.
Holland Smith.
All right. Did you know anything about him to begin with?
He was I only knew as high as my lieutenant. I didn't know anybody further than No, I had anything about him I had read and later on.
Okay. Now you're at Saipan, or were you in the first wave?
No, I was in a reserve regiment. We came in about I think HR was about 11 o'clock. We landed about 5.
Okay. What part of the island did you remember where you landed?
We landed below Garapan, which was one of the large cities.
Okay.
They weren't very large. Well, we landed, and by the time we landed, things were very quiet, and it was starting. It must have been maybe a little later than that because it was starting to get dark. And my platoon was in amongst a bunch of looked like gas tanks, these things, barrels. And I remember I was looking, my squad leader was right in front of me, and his shoe was right in my face practically. And some things are very, suspiciously quiet. Then all of a sudden we heard the first shell coming in, and its first shell, it exploded somewhere near me, and I was looking at a shoe, and a piece of shrapnel took the heel of the shoe right off in front of me. And then they just kept pouring them in on us, and I remember somebody yelling to get out of there because there's gas in there, and so we didn't know where to get out of too. Nobody knew, nobody's giving any orders or anything, but people started to move forward. And so this was the most horrible moment of my life. As you move forward, it looked like all the World War pictures you ever saw in your life were happening all around you. It was all the explosion. I remember I was in sort of a daze. I don't know how much further. We just kept moving forward, and finally we came to a ditch, a curved ditch, and somebody said, "Get down in the ditch," and we plopped in there. And all night long there was firing, and there were people were hit in the ditch, and but you didn't, if you had wounded, you didn't know where to go. I didn't know, had the foggiest idea where the beach was or where you could take anybody, and you just felt if you started moving around, you're going to get killed. So I remember that went on all night. The whole thing was just the whole episode from the time that first shell hit is just practically is just like a dream. I can't. But because the first time we ever on the Roy Moore, we hadn't anything like that.
Mm-hmm. So you really weren't prepared for this?
Oh no, and the casualties were horrible. I remember at just at dawn, just about dawn, I looked up from the trenches, quieted down a little bit. I saw this Marine sort of sitting up over the trench. I said, "Gee, what's he doing up there?" And I looked, he's decapitated. By the next morning, it had quieted down. What has happened, the Navy, well, of course we had a lot of Navy all around us, were now able to see where the artillery was coming from, and so up in the mountains, and they started to, control them. And we were able to start moving again. We had a couple more barrages, but not as bad as that. And we had a number of, Saipan was very tough. It was physically demanding, and it was dangerous. Our first night, we lost half of our people, not either dead or wounded. And the only thing we had left was what we carried. Sure, I didn't have any pack or anything. I just had my ammunition on the belt and my carbine and water. That was it. And it was, as I say, the organization was scattered. Nobody knew where anybody was because of the barrage. And it took a while for that to get all organized again.
How'd you get food?
They finally brought food in. Mm-hmm. The beach wasn't that far away once they could stand up on it and do things. Mm-hmm. But it was 25 or so days of really a lot of things happened, and it was just the heat of the places, almost on the equator, and it was in June and July, so it was hot. Mm-hmm. And then the place was full of bodies, and the bodies caused maggots, and maggots caused flies, so the place, during the day you couldn't even put any food up in your mouth or anything because the flies had covered the spoon. You couldn't go to the bathroom because they'd be after that. You'd have to wait till night to have a bowel movement. You walk along, the flies would get out of every little scratch you had, and there'd be 5 or 6 of them trying to get to the blood. And you just had to walk along like this. You never saw anything like in your life. And that went on for most of the time. And
anything you had to worry about more than anything else? Was it worse at night?
Worse at night, yeah. It didn't turn, the fear was worse at night, but actually the Japanese didn't move around at night, in fact they didn't even, as it turned out, fire much at night because they're afraid of the counterfire again. I know on our gun we had to keep awake all night, so we did 1 hour off, 1 hour on all night. 1 hour on is goes mighty fast when you got that happened. But no, it was bad. The thing about it too, the island was full of civilians, and they got hurt too. They got badly.
Did you meet up with any of the 27th Division?
Yeah, we once, in the middle of the island, we were going to the coast, the west coast, through this trail, and they were coming in another direction, and somebody told me who they were, but just 2 roads that passed in a day. I was telling Wayne that they, just looking at them, they looked like they were older people than us. Old, they're probably 22 or 23 years old, but they seem so much older than us. They're people, and I guess they were just shifting positions between the 2 divisions.
Were there any comments at that time about the Army performance?
No, not at our level.
And generally,
actually, the communications when you're just a soldier, you don't know much what's going on. All I knew what was going on in the battle was what I could see. An interesting thing happened there about the 5th day in the island. As I mentioned, there was a monstrous convoy that brought us there. There were ships, battleships, transport, supply ships, repair ships. The whole harbor was full of ships. And so we were up in this high ground about this point, about the 4th or 5th night, and so they were still there. And when it got bright the next morning, we looked out, and there was nothing in the harbor. A few little, harbor boats. You thought, my God, are we doing that bad? They left us here, I knew we weren't doing very good, but they all pulled out. And what had happened? There was the Japanese fleet had been sighted, and they had a big battle called the Turkey Shoot of the Marianas, where they destroyed practically the Air Force of the Japanese, and that was the pullout for that convoy. Japanese convoy was heading towards the Marianas to probably shell us.
So that must have been a pretty scary...
It was. I didn't want anybody to leave me there. And then the end of the battle had at the end of the campaign there, the most eerie, bizarre thing I ever saw in life was up at the end, a place called Mar Div Point. And we were there for 2 or 3 days just watching people commit suicide.
Really?
Civilians basically jumping into the water, blowing themselves up with grenades, having their own soldiers shoot them. I've seen whole families standing on a rock right along the ocean and then explode a grenade, and then maybe the survivor would crawl off into that water.
What was going through your mind as an 18, 19-year-old?
I think more about it. I think by that time I was a little deadened about being anything shocking me. I thought much more about it in years after. It was a very, what had happened, the end of the island was covered with a shrubbery, very tight, like a privet hedge, whole island, and it was also coral, and it was pockmarked with these holes, so people could get in these holes all along there. And then there was a cliff just about 1,000 feet from the edge, which had caves in the underside. There was a path going down into the flat land before you got into the water. but they had gotten into the civilians who were all afraid of us, probably terrified of these people coming. There were some Japanese soldiers apparently up in the cave underneath where we were standing, and a lot of other people were hidden in these caves all along. So we went down there originally. We had sent scouts down there, and a couple of them got killed by the snipers. So we pulled back to the cliff line, and then had the Japanese speakers try to convince the people that we weren't going to harm them. But I imagine it was like, who are they kidding? I think. But there's nothing much we could do at that point. As I say, they just thought they would kill them. After I went down on a patrol after about the third or fourth day, and I went down to this big cave that was underneath. It was about bigger than this room. That had been carved out, and it was full of bodies. It was piles of Japanese bodies in the middle of it. A stack of them, and 10 million flies, and there were a few. I remember we carried a few. I carried a little girl back, in fact, to the lines. She must have been about 5 or 6, and she had a little shrapnel wound in her cheek, right through it, and she wasn't whimpering or anything. I remember I turned to the civilians there and the Red Cross or whoever but it was a horrible episode. It was, I think, in a whole war, there couldn't have been much more bizarre than that thing. It was,
now, after Saipan was secured,
well, we hung around there for a few days, getting a couple of hot meals. Then we went back aboard ship, the same ship we came on, and pulled out in the ocean a little ways, and then, because Tinian, our next objective, is only 3 or 4 miles from, so we went out just far enough to make another invasion, and the next morning we came back and invaded Tinian.
what was landing there like?
It was very different, because they expected us to land down in the part of the island where the beach was, Tinian town, and they surprised them by landing us on this very small beach on the upper end. A very small, rocky. It didn't look like you could land anybody there at all. In fact, instead of landing a whole group of people, a couple people in a row, they landed us in company formation. One company right behind the other. That's how we landed there. And very little opposition, and put us in a good position. That night they had a banzai attack.
Let's just hold right there. We're going to change.
The whole situation, well, in my experience, here I was in 4 battles on and some of the best, the most vicious on the whole war. I never saw a hero. I never saw anybody. I never saw one hero. I saw people, trying to stay alive, doing their job, doing what they're told, but I never saw anybody be above and beyond the line of duty. But yet, I read all these people, this wonderful thing everybody else was doing. I thought, what's happening?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, even the Persian Gulf, which lasted 2 days and only had maybe 100 battle casualties, and yet they came up with all these medals. Even the Oklahoma bomber got a medal, Bronze Star. It must have been a different caliber of people around, or better, or there are a lot of more talented at writing up the citations and that, but anyway, that's beside the point.
Now, in Tinian, you...
Tinian was the start of it was very hectic with the, you say, the Banzai attack, which...
What was that like?
I didn't hit right in front of my line, but it was, the Japanese were decimated again by it, and I remember when we finally moved out, walking through piles of bodies. They were just lined up. They had came up there apparently from the Tinian town where they expected us to land, and the troops came up during the night and just made that all attack. After that, there was just a scattering of resistance the rest of the way down until you got to the end of the island. This was about 7 days later, and then we had a pretty well held up for quite a while in the rocky area, and we took a lot of casualties there. And as I remember, there was tanks had to be finally brought up to. Again, they were all firing from. You never knew where you were firing from. You were firing from cover. So.
Did you often work with tanks, or?
Not often, no.
What was the shape of the platoon after Tinian? Because you'd been in two campaigns pretty close together.
We were in good shape. Our losses weren't that terrible. We had losses, but no, we were in fairly good shape.
Morale pretty good?
Yeah, and working out. And I thought, we were. It just felt though that by this time that, God, we're going to be here forever. We're going to be out of the Pacific forever. There was never even any thought about when you'd get back or get home. And you felt, well, this is my life, I guess. This is the way I'll spend my days. Because the whole war looked at that point like, God, if the Japanese are going to fight for every island and every spot like this, there's no end. There's no end.
When you weren't in combat, any forms of recreation?
Well, after this, we went back after Tinian. But one little incident at Tinian, I remember we were on a patrol. This was sort of just a mop-up type thing, and there was about 5 or 6 of us. Went through this wooded area, and we came into a clearing, and there was a whole family of Japanese who had hung themselves. There was apparently they fastened a rope on it and then just sat down. And there was a mother, father, and 2 kids hanging and bloated. And strictly because they were, I guess, just fear of these invaders coming in and they had probably been told that, even something like that, you just, at this point, what you do, you just looked at it blasé, and that was part of the day. It's the type of thing now, 50 years later, you take harder than you did at the time. But it was...
Does it bother you 50 years later?
No, it doesn't bother me. I don't know, puts a lot of things in perspective, though.
Absolutely. Now, after Tinian, you went back?
Went back again. This is a very long trip back to Maui. It took almost a month and a half.
Really?
We carried, we had prisoners back. That they had picked up some prisoners, so we had them in the hold.
What were they like? Or you didn't have much time?
They kept them in a hold, and you never saw them. The only way you just saw them about once or twice a day they'd be burying at sea, with the sliding down the plank. And I tell you, as far as the Japanese treatment of the Japanese, the prisoners and the dead, we never made any attempt to identify the bodies, who they were. All the Japanese dead went into a shell hole and they're covered over by a bulldozer. No, they're all missing in action, all the Japanese dead, or else they'd be sealed in the caves that they were in when they were blown up. But I never saw, all the while, I've helped bury an awful lot of Japanese, but I never saw any attempt to identify anyone, even though I'm sure they had identification on them.
Does that bother you?
Yeah, it does when I hear now all this, that we're trying to get the North Vietnamese to give us all sorts of records on our dead and everything, and I thought, gee, that's still, that's a little odd, you know. I think we're being a little hypocritical here.
Now, was it good to get back to Maui?
Got back to Maui and did our, again, just get our replacements to fill in the ranks. We got, did normal marching and training and stuffing, and once in a while we used to get daytime liberty to one of the small towns on the island.
Any USO?
No, I don't remember USO.
How were the replacements treated when they initially came in?
Very good. A lot of times the poor guys were brought in right during a battle and shoved in a line without knowing anybody. That was very typical. So that's the way a lot of them arrived, and a lot of them came in and died, and nobody knew who the guy was.
Were they treated well when they came in?
Yes. Yeah, I believe.
So you were in Maui about how long?
What do you think? I guess we left for Iwo Jima probably about November, because we were around, and the convoy took quite a while forming and everything. Probably November we left for Iwo.
Now, were you given any...
At the same time, once we were aboard ship, we knew where we were going.
Okay.
And by that time we had a pretty good guess anyway, because they had been bombing in Iwo for about 2 months. So you had a pretty good idea. A lot of talk was we were going to Truck, if you've ever heard that name. That was a big base which they eventually bypassed, but
No, go ahead.
it took a long while to get up there.
Now, your first sighting of you, or anything going through your mind? Just another island?
Oh, pretty awesomely bad. It wasn't very picturesque. We landed again as a reserve regiment, and we came in on about 6 o'clock at night, and we were sort of hanging around all day waiting to get on the landing boats, and I kind of kept hoping that they might have canceled the whole thing. But one of us surrendered, either them or us. But when we went in, the Japanese commander was both such an intelligent defense. The upper part of the island was honeycombed with caves, completely a network, unbelievable caves. And the lower part was, the lower 1/3 was the beach, the landing area, and then the Mount Haleakala was on the end. Well, he let almost 2 divisions of Marines get on the island with only modest amount of resistance. And then he just massacred the people on the beach, and that's what for 4 days. He stopped the front lines from going any further through his line of caves network. And for 4 days, people were on the beach, and the beach is only about the size of one hole in a golf course. And you had all these bodies, and anything he threw there, he's going to hit something.
Now, Iwo, the topography there is much different than Saipan.
Oh yeah, well, Iwo I never saw a tree on Iwo. The part of where all the caves was, it looked like a massive rock pit that had been hit by an atom bomb. About this thing, just no organization to it, bodies, small boulders, big boulders, cliffs. There was, well, the beach was had on both sides there was beach, but it was black sand, sort of like a, I don't know what you call it. It's even sand, more of a gravel, black gravel, and. When you stepped in it, it made a very big, like an elephant thing. And it had no, the only feature, predominant feature was where the famous flag region was, the Suribachi. And
what was it like being on that beach? Basically, there's no cover.
That's right. It was. I came as sure. At the time, I had to transfer to the battalion intelligence section, and I was what they call a intelligence scout. Theoretically, I was supposed to find material of intelligence value, and it didn't work out. I ended up being a gopher for the colonel in charge of the battalion, who was his name was Vandergriff, and he was the son of the commandant of the Marine Corps.
What's he like?
He was a wild man. I think he was trying to live up to the name. He was a lieutenant colonel. But anyway, I had two guys in my little group, and we landed. When I came ashore, the first thing, the shore, you couldn't believe it, because they had hit a lot of boats coming in. So the place, the shore was just amazingly, with every sort of debris and junk and bodies and everything. So I came ashore about, it was just getting dark again. And I fell on the ground as soon as I got up out of the water to orient myself. There was a guy laying there right next to me with his rifle out and everything. The guy didn't recognize it, so I looked at him, and he had been shot at some point in the day right through the helmet. So he was looking perfectly like a normal, no blood, I didn't see anything, but he was dead. So we went in, didn't know any place else. They couldn't see any of our guys that we were supposed to be with, any of our company. So we ran ashore about 200 feet or so, 300. And I told the guys, dig in, a little spot. We dug in the holes next to him. Other people started to dig in all around us. So the whole place was full of guys digging in. And that's where we were for 3 days, because the frontline troops had been held up on the other side of the airport. Somebody made a big mistake by putting that many people on shore. But the Japanese, who were firing from the upper end, artillery and mortars, well, they couldn't miss. Anytime they fire a mortar, if it hit the island, it's going to hit some of us. So it was just, because I remember once during the night, this was we were in the midst of a barrage, and this thing came flying in on me, and I felt it, and I felt the face. And I thought, oh my God, if this is the face, I've had it. And it was a part of a mask, a gas mask, that you know, resembles a face.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I felt. Then I still, after 3 days, I didn't know where the company was. I wasn't going to walk around looking for them. They were looking for me, that's for sure. So I finally did locate where I was supposed to be. And then I went a number of times up to the lines with the colonel, and the other times I went with my group just trying to find things that were of intelligence value, but actually it turned out we were just souvenir hunting practically. But we went down a number of caves foolishly, and one time we went down, the three of us, this cave that was covered with branches and everything, so it was camouflaged. But it had steps carved down into it out of the stone. The stone anyway was easily carved. So I went down maybe 10 steps, and there was a Japanese, the dead Japanese in the middle of the steps. So I walked over to him, and I have a flashlight, and I have a .45 that I had borrowed. I went down, and the cave then, right ahead of me, it went about 30 feet and then curved. And it was full of boxes and stuff. And then off to the right and left, there are other caves. So I'm looking at all the caves and everything. And I raise the flashlight, and I'm sure I saw a face coming, looking around the corner at me. So I shot at it, like the whole thing lit up. And then I started backing out of the cave like a Western, you know, the last, up, backwards, all the way up the cave, past the dead body and everything. That was my last visit in the cave. I was, holy shit. And then I've heard later on that people got in real trouble in this cave. I shouldn't have. Just foolishness doing it. But I was there, of course, when the flag raising took place, but it really didn't make much of a difference to us at the time. There wasn't any strategic value.
Did you see the
I could see it. I think now when I heard more about the flag raising, and read about him, I think I must have seen the original, where they just put up a flag and the boats made all the noise and everything, because we didn't know what was going on. We suddenly looked back, and it was about a mile back from the front line. We looked back and saw the people on top of the Suribachi, and so I hope it's our guys. But that's all I thought about it. And apparently a couple of hours later, they did the famous Rosenthal shot. But it was symbolic. I didn't know that that was a famous photograph until months later. And I think I was 2 to 3 years back home before I realized what an impact the thing really had. It was a sensation. But it was a perfect thing, and people considered that, you know, the end of the battle and everything. Well, it wasn't the end of the battle. It had nothing to do with the end of the battle. But it was symbolism that counted.
So how long were you on Iwo?
About a month.
About a month?
Celebrated my 21st birthday on Iwo. A very mild celebration.
No, you didn't get a cake?
No. They kept me alive. And it was funny. Another thing, as the way it turned out, and I think this was true for a lot of people there, I could have went ashore on Iwo or any of the others carrying a 6-pack of beer and a ukulele and done just as good, because I spent the war being a shootee, not a shooter. And because there was no, like in the war movies, there was no firefights going on where you're shooting a guy's aim. I never saw anybody aim at a person, or they weren't there. You had to just aim at caves, or you had to send the flamethrowers in. You had to protect the flamethrowers while they went in, or the flamethrower tanks, or what have you. But you didn't see the people.
Snipers a problem?
Huh?
Snipers a problem?
Well, snipers would have been the smallest problem, because a sniper is going to make a small hole. And I was worried about these big holes. And it was very weird, the whole thing. I don't know if there's been other wars like that, but that was pretty much the way our war went.
Mm-hmm. So Iwo, you were there a month.
And it took us back and the same routine again. Back to, I guess, with Maui, and we were probably, I know we were supposed to go into the invasion of Japan, and probably early the next year.
Any thought?
No, none at all about that. I got a little break. They sent us back, sent a few of the people that had been in the division a long while over to temporary duty working in Pearl Harbor. So I worked there for a couple of months, and that's where I was when the war actually ended.
Oh. Where were you when you heard the atomic bombing?
That's where I was.
Okay.
I was on guard duty in this tent camp, prison of war camp in Pearl Harbor and Fort Island, and not much reaction. We were no place that anybody celebrated. People that were celebration that you see in the newsreel a while, there were people who had never been any place. Because why, they wouldn't be sitting around Times Square if they'd been in a war.
Right. Any thoughts on the dropping of the bomb? Did you think about it at that point?
At the time, I was very happy that it happened, because I could just visualize what an invasion of Japan would be if comparing it. They would have fought for every little village and the whole island. I've had a lot of thoughts on later. I realized that it was a decision, and you can't quarrel with things like that. Sort of wondered why they ever dropped the Nagasaki one. That never made me any sense at all.
So there's VJ Day, and what's your career like after that in the service?
Very short. After that, after about a couple of weeks, they brought us back to the camp again with the regular unit. And then the ones that had been with the division for any length of time, or they brought us back on a escort carrier to San Diego. We were then brought back up to Camp Pendleton. We were there a few days and then broke up. There was they sent those that had enlisted up in the northern part of the country, the Bainbridge. They sent the Bainbridge for discharge. They sent the others to San Diego, so what have you. So when we broke up after all this time together, there was nothing. Nobody said goodbye. I never said goodbye to any of the people I was with. I was by myself. I didn't know anybody when I was going through the discharge procedure. After 3 days at Bainbridge, I caught a train up to New York, and the only one meeting me at Penn Station was some bum. I got the early train, and that was it. That was the end of my war.
Happy to be home?
I was, yeah, I was sure.
What did you do? What was the first thing you did when you got home? Anything you were looking forward to doing?
Not really. No, I tell you, I didn't have a very active social life beforehand, and I didn't have really a lot of friends. The ones that most of my friends were also in the service and other services, so I never really talked too much about it because they shared a lot of that type of thing.
What did you go to work right away?
2 months. I went to work for the New York Telephone Company, and I was with them for 25 years in various things, and then I went to AT&T and retired from AT&T.
So you look back at your career in the service, any general impressions, thoughts?
The war years, they shaped my whole life. My whole life was just, again, I think I was able to accept things better. I could put things that people, I think, in perspective much better.
So that was
A lot of items that might upset other people, I think I could roll with a little bit more, but for better or for worse, probably I didn't have the drive, maybe a lot of other people, but it was shaped, whatever my life became, it was shaped by those years completely.
Any regrets about going in the service?
I know, no, I'm glad. There's a satisfaction, I guess, knowing that you can put up with things, that you were able to accept it and didn't do anything to be ashamed of. And
have you attended any reunions?
back in 1950, I went to New York. For one reason or the other, I haven't been to any of the others. I would still help to go, but I don't travel that much, and there's fewer people that I would know. Of course, they're dropping off. But it was an experience.
Any last comments?
Not really, no. I enjoyed talking to you
Well,
about
great.
it. I like to talk about it. When somebody wants to hear it, I don't like to be an old soldier.
Is it therapeutic for you to talk about it?
No, I don't think I ever had any problems, psychiatric type problems associated with being in war.
Just did your job and...
Yes, right. I never developed many profound thoughts while I was in there. It was just life. Right. It was the way the ball had bounced in my life, and I did. For the first time, I was with more people. I came from a small town, and I never had a lot of people to associate with, and suddenly I'm living with these people for long periods of time, and I got to say, it was kind of enjoyable. And I saw things happen that are history. I figure I'm a little teeny. I had my 10 minutes of fame.
Absolutely.
With no fame.
Well, thank you very much, Al. This was a great interview. We really appreciate you.
Well, I think it's very good. You're happy doing here, and I think it'll work nice.
Now I've got a little paper.